What is going on, beautiful folks? Welcome to another episode of the Mental Healness Podcast with your favorite diagnosed narcissist, me, Mr. Lee Hammock, mental heals myself. Today, we're talking about cult dynamics, y'all, and I have a very, very special guest for y'all. We have former sports broadcaster and best-selling author of Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, Mr. Peter Young. What's going on, Peter? How you doing today?
Lee, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
No, thanks for coming on. I'm super excited to talk to you today. So just tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
So I always give the Reader's Digest version. I, growing up in New Jersey, was going to be the next Larry Bird, and that didn't happen. So then I got into coaching, and I was going to be the next Mike Krzyzewski or John Wooden, and that didn't happen. And then I got into sports broadcasting, and I was going to be the next Bob Costas, and that didn't happen. And then I unwittingly got sucked into a cult when I married into it, and kind of destroyed my marriage, my family. But I recovered and wrote a book. It is an Amazon bestseller. So I'm not trying to be the next Louis L'Amour or John Steinbeck or John Grisham. Just finally, Lee, trying to be the best version of me, Peter Young.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. That's great to hear. I know you said being try to be Larry Bird and stuff like that. I thought it was funny because I hear that if one thing fails, try something else, right? Or if this doesn't work, I'll try something else. And that's always a good mindset to have, though. Like if one thing doesn't work, there's always other things to pursue. And I'm glad you end up. Do you feel like you found your calling with the writing?
Oh, I do. Yeah. So, I kind of consider myself a storyteller, and that's what a good sports broadcaster will do. He doesn't kind of dominate the game, but he tells the story of the game and the athletes. And so that's what I do as a writer. I'm a storyteller trying to become a better writer.
Okay, that's amazing right there. So the you said you married the love of your life, and it somehow winded you up in a cult. How did we get there?
Yeah, good question. So I call her Paige in my book, met her back in the fall of 1996 in little old Pocatello, Idaho. I was the sports broadcaster for the local ABC affiliate. And she's this tall, beautiful, stunningly gorgeous woman, 6'1", long blonde hair. You couldn't miss her. And I'd seen her around town, never met her. And then when I finally did meet her, I heard about this family guru that she had, this guy called Uncle Robert. And so we dated, and it got pretty serious fairly quickly. But I knew she had this guy in her life. She talked about him all the time, this Uncle Robert. So I eventually ended up meeting him, and I thought, I can't marry this woman until I meet the guy. And he was odd, eccentric, weird. I didn't see him as a narcissist yet. And I thought, well, he's relatively harmless, and I was dead wrong. So we got married, and for the first few years of our marriage, he lived in California, we lived in Idaho. He didn't have that much of an impact on our lives, but that changed pretty quickly. And so then I became the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water and went along to get along because my wife adored the guy. And she was born into the cult.
Mm.
She was born into it, so she knew no other world where this guy was the expert on everything.
That right there, that part right there makes me feel bad for people in your wife's situation because I hear that so much because you get born into it. That's the only world you know. That's the world you know, and this is the life you live and whatnot. And then you get pulled. You don't know anything different, so you don't think you're doing anything bad. And I think sometimes, even in her situation, I feel like sometimes she doesn't even know she was doing anything bad. You wrote on here that being in the cult destroyed your marriage. How did that come about?
So, we were married for over 20 years, and in a marriage, I always tell people, for the Christian audience, a marriage should have Christ in the center. No parent, no child, no guru, no pastor, no priest. All these people can help strengthen a marriage from the outside, but you should have Christ in the center, nobody else. Well, we had Uncle Robert in the center of our marriage. And so anytime, she should have come to me, we would have a serious discussion about whatever it may be. She would go to him first. And so she always went to him. He was always the expert in her life, the one that she adored, revered, and most respected. I was probably a distant second until eventually probably a distant third or fourth behind her father, who was also in the cult. So, she listened to him and eventually really left me to draw closer to him. But it took a long time to get there, about 20 years.
Okay, so that's one of the questions I asked. Like, so her family was also in the cult as well, like her mother and her father, or just the father?
Mother and father. So again, it was very small at its most. It might have had, let's say, 20 people, maybe a dozen adults plus some kids. So it would have been Paige and her parents, her older brother, a couple of other guys in and out, kind of on the periphery of the cult. and then my children. So it was pretty small, but definitely Uncle Robert would have kind of glommed on in a very parasitic fashion to Paige's parents before Paige was even born. So this is early 70s.
Okay, so he's around the same age as her parents were.
Correct. Yeah, they're both, all three of them would be around 80 at this point.
Okay. Oh, right now, so they're 80 right now. Okay. Okay. I was just curious about how that works right there. Because, like, do you know? I don't know if this is the right question. How they even started? How they even came about? Like, that cult. How did they even get started?
And I can tell you how it got started, but I think the bigger question is, how does a narcissistic cult leader germinate or form? What kind of soil does he spring out of? But
Hmm.
they met at a tiny seminary in Fresno, California, back in like the late 60s, early 70s. And so Uncle Robert's real name is Robert Booty, came from Syria, met an American woman, got married. And then when he goes to the seminary, meets Paige's parents who come down from Canada. And Paige's parents would have been very ripe and ready for a guy like this, a very manipulative, kind of a con artist. And
Hmm.
so it was a very one-sided relationship uh, from the get-go.
Okay. And then, like I said, once it got started, so it was just you said her parents, him. Were there any other adults in there other than you
Yeah,
as well?
yeah. So there would have been a few other people that kind of came and went from the cult. They would have been in it for a while, then maybe saw what it was and were able to get out. There was a guy we called Brother Michael. I always describe him as like Batman and Robin. Like Uncle Robert was Batman, and Brother Michael was Robin, right? He was the sidekick. So there were a few people like that over the years.
So, what were some of the earliest signs that, like, you've realized now were manipulation, even though, like, you might have missed them at that point in time?
Well, I can tell you when I first met my future father-in-law. So I'm dating Paige. It's been like a month in. I go up to northern Idaho where they lived for Thanksgiving. And I'm not in the house 10, 15 minutes. I go down the hall to go to the bathroom and I stand up to go pee, right? My guy. And then as soon as I open the door to walk out, he's standing right there. And he would always stand very close to you. And he said, in my house, the men need to sit down and to pee. You need to sit down to pee because it's cleaner. So clearly he was listening. And then he said this phrase, Lee, that, it's the first time I heard it. And he said it many times over the years. He said, Uncle Robert taught me that. And
Mm.
so Uncle Robert would teach him everything. There was nothing out of bounds that Uncle Robert would not tell my former in-laws, here's what you need to do. And they followed it. Everything that he told them to do, they did. And so then for me, marrying into this family, that control was, put upon my shoulders. And I sat down to pee for many years. And long about a lot of other crazy things.
How does that work, though? How does it, like, I know you said that the dad started doing that type of stuff. So, how does, I'm just trying to figure out the mentality that goes into like a narcissistic cult leader right there. How do they convince people that this is correct? Like, this is the right way to live? Like, this is kind of like my way or the highway type of situation, and to accept that.
Yeah, the analogy I give would be like, Uncle Robert would have thought that he was more Christian than anybody else, more
Hmm.
enlightened, knew the gospel better than anybody else. So the analogy I would give, like if you mishit a golf ball, Lee, like if you mishit a golf ball by this much, okay, 100 yards down the fairway, it's way off to the left, way off to the right, nowhere near where you wanted it to go. Well,
Hmm.
Uncle Robert would tee up the right golf ball, if I keep this metaphor going. He would read the Bible, and he knew the Bible really well. But then with each and every verse, he would give it his unique and perverse spin. Every single verse, year after year after year, that we would meet with him. So 5, 10, 15 years down the road, we're nowhere near what the gospel really means. We're really following
Hmm.
his gospel. So it was a very slow, subtle process that took a long time. And I have to add, too, for me, I went along with it to get along with my wife. If I wasn't in love with Paige and you sat me down with Uncle Robert, we had a cup of coffee, after 15, 20 minutes, I'd be like, well, he's a funny guy, but he's nuts. He's kind of crazy. I followed him and I kind of slowly got beaten down and brainwashed because I didn't want to lose my marriage.
Hmm. So you mentioned how they use the Bible in their manipulations and whatnot. What role did faith play in getting you into it and also helping you escape this cult dynamic?
Well, it really is. It's the centerpiece with all of this. So, 20 years in, Uncle Robert and my wife were convinced that I was not a Christian, that I had lied, tried to convince them or fool them that I was a Christian. So, thus, I was a fraud.
Mm.
She and Uncle Robert then started to teach our 5 children that I was the devil. that I was Satan, I was a sorcerer, I was a bloodline or a sperm donor. And you probably know this, that a lot of what cult leaders do, and all cult leaders are narcissistic, but not all
Hmm.
narcissists are cult leaders.
Yeah.
But often cult leaders will act as a gatekeeper to God. Whatever faith you're part of, they will act as a gatekeeper to God. Where in the Christian faith, you don't need a gatekeeper. There's no intermediary between you and Christ. Well, for Uncle Robert, he always put himself in between. So I had to kind of get approval from him before I could be saved, which is wicked and unbiblical, right?
Hmm.
So for many years, I knew that Paige doubted my faith. I knew that Uncle Robert doubted my faith. And it was probably 17 years into our marriage that I finally caved and thought, well, maybe I'm missing something, right? Maybe all these years. And I grew up in a Christian home, went to church as a kid. I professed my faith. I'd been baptized all before I met Uncle Robert. And I thought, well, maybe I'm missing something. And I wasn't. I was getting brainwashed, is what was happening. So on the way out, my faith was really the only thing that saved me. And that was through my friends and my family that was not involved in the cult. My parents and brothers and sister-in-laws. They recognized it right away, and they helped me see and thus recover.
Okay. Was there a specific moment in time you think you kind of woke up and you started realizing that everything looked different than what you thought it was?
Yes. So I got to set this up with a story. So we had
Okay.
5 children. Okay. So we had 5 children, and we had talked about maybe having a sixth child. And if it was a boy, we'd name him Matthew. So this is again 17, 18 years into our marriage. Paige and I go on a date night. She gets all dressed up. She looks beautiful. And she tells me of this burning desire to have another child, only not with me. Uncle Robert had 2 sons, and they had granddaughters, not grandsons. And Paige was adamant that Uncle Robert's precious bloodline had to continue for literally the world to survive. Like, he is so important. He's preventing World War III because he has all of these famous and influential friends, and everybody believes them, and we have to protect his bloodline. So she wanted to be a surrogate and provide Uncle Robert with a male grandson by having a child in vitro through one of his sons, which I, of course, was repulsed by this. And it did not happen, thankfully. Then, fast forward about 2 years later, when she leaves me and considers me a fraud and a devil and not a true believer, not a true Christian, and thus someone the kids should not trust, our kids, she started calling me a bloodline and a sperm donor. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that is wicked. And that was one of the first triggers for me that helped me realize there's something wrong here.
Yeah. Okay. I'm when you were talking, you said something that resonated with me, kind of like made me go into like my mental, my mental and different mental space right there. I feel like you said like all cult leaders are narcissists and not all narcissists are cult leaders. Yeah, which is true. It's that I feel like cult leaders thrive on fear, right? Is the fear a big part of that right there? Because I feel like they always find something that you maybe don't even realize that you're afraid of, but they find a fear and they nurture it, they water it, and they convince you that this fear is real. I feel like with your wife, this fear that he needed a male heir was something that he seemed like he was watering for a while. What do you think about that right there?
Hmm. Yeah, I think cult leaders navigate towards fear and shame for one reason only, and that is to control the cult members. So they
Mm,
use fear, they use the shame and the guilt to control the cult member. So that way you can't leave. You're always going to doubt yourself. You need the cult leader. You can't survive life in the outside world without him because he has convinced you of how guilty you are or how shameful you are. And then you become fearful of the outside world. And that is cultivated over a long time. Whether it is conscious or not on the part of the cult leader, they all do it. Lee, I've
mm,
done a lot of research on cults since I got out of it. And they all look, and sound different, right? Some are sexually abusive or physically abusive, which ours was not, thankfully. But they all have a leader, and they all check the same boxes when you peel back the onion. All these leaders are really the same.
mm. So, what do all cult leaders tend to share psychologically? Because you mentioned that all of them are the same. What do you think they share psychologically?
Well, to me, I've had experience with one, and then I've done a lot of research on other ones. They act as a gatekeeper to God. They
Hmm.
make all the rules, but the rules don't apply to them. They're very narcissistic. They have a strong grasp on psychology, and they control their members through isolation, paranoia, and secrecy, along with the guilt and shame. And they also try and have all of the members of the cult compete as if they are all a son or daughter of the cult leader. So, like in our cult, we had my in laws, my wife and I, and my kids. So that's 3 generations. But within that, everybody kind of becomes one and the same, and you're all like little kids. He will demean you and put you down. So you're all like little children underneath the cult leader. And oh, the last thing is they hate questions.
Mm. Do they hate questions?
Oh, they hate questions. And I always tell people the truth doesn't mind to be questioned, right? If you believe in something strongly and you know it to be the truth, you will welcome questions. Cult leaders hate questions. So, for instance, Uncle Robert felt that everything in history, every plane crash, recession, war, depression, you name it, was a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, can you give me some examples? Can you give me some proof, right? Like, can you explain why you think this way? And I would never get a good solid answer. I would get maybe a little bit of an answer. And then the rest of it was, Peter, why are you so stupid that you don't understand me? Right? So it's, kind of epic gaslighting. And the
Yeah.
problem with me, it was never that I asked him a question he couldn't answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's wild right there. I wrote down that gatekeeper to God because that makes so much sense right there. Like, would you say it like in real life, a relationship between you and Christ is like a direct connection right there
Right.
in these
Right.
cult dynamics or cult, like, narcissistic family dynamics. That leader is going to be the intermediary or try to get in between there to twist the message and whatnot. Oh, that's yeah. I wrote that down right there and highlighted it. I was like, okay, the gatekeeper to God. That makes a lot of sense right there. I never thought about it from that perspective right there. I know they use religion as a manipulation tool, but I just didn't see how they get in between you and your relationship with God and are able to like you said earlier, subtly twist that over time to cultivate their own beliefs and get you to believe their own belief system and things like that. I appreciate you sharing it right there. That's something that's I'm gonna take that with me. That'll be in my wallet from now on, right?
Yeah, and again, he knew his Bible. The Bible even talks about it, how Christ is the gate, right? Like they talk about him being the shepherd, guarding his flock or his sheep, and he even talks about, I think, in one of the Gospels about trying to go around the gate, and again, Christ is visually represented as the gate. So Uncle Robert tried to put himself before the gate, which again is completely unbiblical, and wicked. But in his case, it was very effective.
Yep. It's a effective tool right there. And you mentioned earlier how your family that were not in the cult played a role in you getting out of it. Like, how does that work for somebody else? Like in that situation right there, how can the family members or the friends support someone that is inside of a cult dynamic that doesn't realize it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we were in the cult, or when I was in the cult, we lived in Idaho and Montana. So I'm the youngest of five boys. So, I got one brother who lives in Charlotte near you, and then I've got some other family members in Wisconsin and California. They all kind of knew a little bit about Uncle Robert. They had, met him at my wedding because he spoke at the wedding, and they kind of knew of him, but they didn't really know what was going on, the inner workings of this little cult. So then when I finally reached out to them after Paige had left me, she and Uncle Robert started to teach the children that I was the devil, that I was a sperm donor.
Mm,
I knew that I needed help. So I reached out to my family and kind of told them and filled them in about what was going on. And they immediately, showered me with love and affection and help and support that I needed. And it was through them because they saw it right away, right? Like they would see it
mm-mm.
immediately, like, wow, this guy is crazy. And even though I was only brainwashed for about 2.5, 3 years, it took me a year, Lee, to fully realize, wow, I was in a cult. Because I didn't want to think it at first. And I would say, nobody knows they're in a cult. You only know you were in a cult. And so when
Mm.
I finally realized, oh yeah, I was in a cult. Because cults at their foundation, at the base level, it's all about undue mind control. And if it's working, you don't know you're in a cult. You think it's something better, right?
That's absolutely true right there. You do think it's something better right there. Yes, I gotta give you a round of applause for that one right there because that's so I got goosebumps because that's so unbelievably true because like you don't realize it until you're out of it, and then that's the goal of the cult right there to help to make it seem like you're not in a cult, like everybody else is in a cult, right? Like you have the right way of thinking. Everybody else is wrong. You
Right,
listen to Uncle Robert. Listen,
right.
listen to this right here. That is, wow. That's got my mind thinking right there and whatnot. So I also wrote down a question right here. So what happens if like the person that's in the cult cuts off the family? What can the family do in that situation right there?
Yeah, and I was going to follow up with, the idea about, you don't know you're in a cult. Everybody who knows you are in the cult is outside of it, right? So your family members,
Mhm.
they can see it. They're the ones that know what's going on. And so in my case, we didn't completely cut off the rest of my family. Paige had cut off some of her siblings, and they were vilified and shunned viciously, all at the direction of Uncle Robert. And it's a tough situation because again, the person in the cult needs help. You on the outside know they need help. But if you could go and talk to them and you kind of explain it, then that person can go right back into the cult, whatever that looks like. And then the cult leader takes him 10, 15 minutes using this coded language. And all of a sudden, immediately, whatever the family members had told this person is forgotten, right? So that coded language, the manipulative use of words, used by the cult leader, all of a sudden all of that is undone. What you really need to do is get that person in the cult completely removed from the cult leader. Easier said than done. In my case, I was kind of cut out when my wife left me. I kind of got kicked out of the cult. And so it was a lot easier for me because then all of my family had access to me. For the person that's still in the cult, it's hard. But really what it comes down to is you got to get that person removed so he or she is not going to go right back and hear the cult leader with those words again.
Okay. Yeah, because I talk to a lot of people in these situations, like maybe not as deeply in a cult, like an actual cult, but like in a narcissistic family dynamic that kind of runs itself like a cult when they will just cut off the outside world, like any type of outside influence at the beck and call of that narcissistic family leader or the cult leader, right? They'll cut them off and there'll be no contact. Like, I haven't seen my daughter in years. And then they'll reach out of nowhere. It's like, been 3 years since I hear from her and I just got a message from her. What do I do? And I was just like, ah, it can be a shocking situation to be a part of right there. So thanks for sharing it because it can be tough. And I know, like you just said, your family wasn't completely always like cut off and whatnot. But what, like, when you say your wife left you, did she cut you off from the entire family dynamic, like the kids and stuff as well?
Yeah, and that's right. I figured we should head there next because we had the five children, and they were taught some awful things. In high conflict divorce, we call it parental alienation, where one
Hmm.
parent tries to alienate the kids from the other. And Paige, was off the charts. I mean, the kids, in addition to being taught that I was the devil and a bloodline of a sperm donor and Satan and a sorcerer, she taught
Hmm.
them things like the fifth commandment of the Bible, which says honor thy father and mother, didn't apply to me because it only applied to parents or fathers who love their children. My children literally thought that they did not need to honor me because of what Paige had said. And it all came from Robert into Paige and then into the kids. So when she left me, yes, she took the three youngest kids with her to Idaho, where she was living with her parents at the time. And then my family was very alarmed when they found this out. They helped me secure some good attorneys, and Paige eventually filed for divorce. And then when the courts got involved, we got a guardian ad litem involved. When they saw this, it took a few minutes, right? Like it was so obvious, horrific parental alienation, and then a small cult involvement, which is abusive to kids. So the three youngest children were sent back to me. She had taken them when she left. The courts sent them back to me, and they lived with me. So I've been a single dad now for 7 years. And I'm not a big fan of the courts and having the government involved in my life, but they got it right. And they really got it right in my case. And I'm very thankful for the help I got.
Oh wow, that is good because I hear some of these stories sometimes, like the partner who's still in the cult will abscond with the children and disappear.
Yep.
That situation happens all the time. Like it's like, yeah, we were going through divorce and this cult is off the record or off the books or whatever, just kind of lives off the lamb. We don't know where they are, so they just
Right.
take the kids and disappear or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be.
We've had multiple guardian ad litems and a parenting evaluator. There's been a standing master and the judge, multiple attorneys and counselors, and literally everybody agrees. It's not like, well, maybe it's Peter's fault, or, well, I could see Paige doing this better. Every single one of them sees it right away for what it is, parental alienation and a cult,
Mm.
and it's been unanimous, thankfully. And so I've been rescued, and my kids have because of that, right? So we've been reunited.
Okay, yay! I'm happy to hear that right there. So with with the book taking off and you doing these speaking events and things like that, has she heard about any of that? Is she like privy to any of that information?
Yes, she has. And, I've had several people read my book and they'll honestly they'll say, "Hey, why did you give her such a pass? Why were you so kind to her?" And in my book, I didn't want to tear her apart. It wasn't to demean her and rip her apart. It was to show the strength and the power of the cult. It was meant to expose Uncle Robert, right? And
Hmm.
expose him, and then also expose the dangers of small but destructive religious cults to help hopefully warn people so they don't do what I did. But I never meant to try and, drag her through the mud because really, she's a victim just like I am. She just doesn't know it yet. Her life has been turned upside down because of Uncle Robert. Now, it's been her choice all these years to follow him and to believe him. But I do believe deep down she is a victim. And so, yes, she does know that I do these podcasts. She has read the book, and she's not happy about it. She still thinks I'm in the wrong, and then I'm just kind of making all of this up.
Hmm. So there has been some contact between y'all two since then.
Well, there's been very little other than a recent court filing. She was very upset about all of this, so she actually filed something in the courts to try and have me held in contempt of court. And again, I don't use her real name, and I don't know, I don't
Hmm.
bash her when I do these interviews.
Yeah.
That's not the goal. The goal is not to just air my dirty laundry about a divorce. It is to expose the dangers of small cults. Because Lee, I used to be a sports broadcaster. I was on ESPN. I was on
Hmm.
CBS while I'm in this cult, right? And nobody had any
Oh,
idea. And so
wow.
that's the goal, is to expose it from that angle, not to try and get back at her. So.
Hmm. And I felt that even at the beginning when you were detailing how you met her and she was born into it, I could just can tell you were coming from a place of empathy when you described it. It's like, oh, she's this horrible evil person. No, no, she was born into it, and as you know, like you said earlier, you don't know you're in a cult until you get out of it, and this has been her entire life,
Right.
right? This is
And when I
all that she knows.
Yeah, and when I met her, I mean, I literally thought this is the woman of my dreams. I thought for the first few years of our marriage, I was the best husband ever. She was the best wife ever. And then obviously the bloom fell off the rose as the years went on. But I never wanted the divorce. I really fought it as much as I could. I really hoped
Hmm.
it'd be this incredible story, right? We both come out of this cult and we salvage our marriage, and wow, what a beautiful testimony. And it wasn't meant to be. But that was my thinking for a long time. I never wanted to get divorced or have my family ripped apart like this.
Hmm. And then when she got divorced, I'm assuming that she didn't marry Uncle Robert, is she? Because I feel like that whole baby situation was kind of wild.
No, and people have asked that, was there any kind of sexual abuse or grooming going on? I don't know. I don't think so. I know of nothing. To me, it was all emotional, spiritual, and mental abuse, and I hope that's all it was. From my vantage point, I didn't see anything untoward, physically or
Mhm.
sexually. She did not marry him. She has remarried, and I try not to share too many details. So it's we don't talk much. Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay. Oh man. So that is, yeah, being on ESPN and CBS, all the other stuff, and while actively being in the cult kind of shows you how it just it, it doesn't necessarily affect your how people view you in the world. In the out here in the world, people just don't view you differently. Like, oh, that's Peter. He's in the cult. Watch out for him,
Right.
right? It's just like you're just you. You know.
Yeah, you bring up a
And I-
great point because cults can easily hide within society, right? Like we didn't shave our heads. I didn't wear some big like robe or something. I wasn't around town banging a drum. We didn't commit mass suicide. I was an ESPN sports broadcaster and no one had any idea. And I can remember, Lee, I kind of knew that things were bad, that my marriage was in jeopardy. And I'm doing a football game on ESPN, and it was at the University of Idaho. I can't remember who they were playing. And I had my sheet in front of me that has all the stats, the player's name, their number, their hometown, height, weight, and all that, head coach's record, everything, right? We call that like our sheet that we work off of. And throughout there were like little verses I had written and little sayings so that I could get through the game because I was so anxious and so fearful that my life was crumbling in front of me. And so I'm trying to call the game here on ESPN. And then I'm also in my mind, without saying it, reading these little Bible verses to calm me down. What a strange experience that was. But cult members will always feel doubt. In Christianity, there's victory in Christ, right? That's a phrase, right? We have victory in Christ. You will never experience victory under a cult leader because they will always have you doubting your every single thought and word.
Mm. And that's how they maintain that power and control over you because you live in doubt. Then the entirety of the time that you're in within that cult dynamic. Ah, goodness gracious. Um, So you mentioned faith again. So what role does faith play in like reclaiming your life after you leave after you leave the cult or the toxic influence?
Yeah, so some people have said, "Hey, it's great that, you didn't turn your back on your faith after all this." And I answer, "Well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have my faith." I was never suicidal, but I had really hit rock bottom. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was a wreck. It was a really bad year when I went through all that, but I recovered. And so now, I don't have a family guru, that I look towards or I'm afraid of. I don't have a wife that I'm afraid of, not walking around on eggshells. If I have an issue or a problem or I'm afraid or whatever it is, I can go straight to the Lord, right? And the Bible talks about we can call him Abba, Father, our Father in the Lord, right? And just go straight to him. There's a chapter in the Bible from James chapter 1, and I'll paraphrase it. It says, listen, if you lack wisdom, ask it, and he'll give it to you, but don't doubt. And so I have done that. So I am a million times stronger now as a man. I was a shadow of a man. It's embarrassing how wimpy and scared I was, 7, 8 years ago. I'm a million times stronger now, Lee. And I don't say that arrogantly. I say that because the Lord has taken me from this horrible position and I've experienced all this pain. And I've used that kind of like the phoenix, right, to rise from the ashes. And now I'm a much stronger man. And I thank the Lord for that. I wish I could have learned this lesson a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that being said right there, like with Uncle Robert being the intermediary to God or just playing the middleman, was it different trying to establish a new that reconnection? I know you said you never lost your faith and whatnot. Was it different when he was removed though? Like, did it feel different, like
Oh,
immediately
yeah.
reconnecting to God
Yeah.
with this new perspective without him in the middle of it?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about, well, do you experience shame or guilt because you got sucked into this cult? And no, I don't experience any of that at all. There's a million different ways it could happen, right? That somebody could get sucked in. For me, it was trying to get along with my wife and save my marriage. But when I finally had the realization where the Lord opened my eyes and ears to the truth, there was a little bit of shame, like, oh my gosh, like what an idiot. Why did I do this? Of course, there is forgiveness, right? But I will say this though, and there was a Paige's younger sister. She got shunned and kicked out of the cult 25 years ago. I mean, they treated her viciously. She and
Mhm.
I reconnected because I didn't talk to her at all for most of my marriage to her Paige. But she and I reconnected and we kind of, were swapping stories, right, of our experience in this cult. And she said, it may take you years to not hear Uncle Robert's voice in your head.
Mhm.
And it didn't take years, but it probably took almost a year where I would hear a pastor speak or I would read a Bible verse and I would hear his interpretation, his voice in my head. Thankfully, I don't hear that anymore. But I'm sure a lot of cult leaders cult members will have that, where there's this residue that takes a long time to kind of wash away from you. And I think that's probably normal for people that get out of a cult. It's not an overnight
Mhm.
transformation.
Is there anything you feel like you did in particular to help with that transition right there, to like get rid of that residue that you just mentioned, like
Mm.
not necessarily hearing his voice anymore and whatnot?
Yeah. So, I always tell people that when you are isolated, when you become isolated, then you become very vulnerable to a con artist, a narcissist, or a cult leader, right? Again, in the Bible talks about the body of Christ. So if I cut off my thumb, I'm not going to die. My thumb will die, right? Okay, so when we became cut off, I didn't really have other people that I was listening to. It was only Uncle Robert. Well, when I got out of the cult, then I started to listen to other people. And I would have several people in my life, Lee, that I would listen to. Some I would agree with, some I didn't. But the key was I was no longer isolated. I was interacting and having good, healthy conversations with other believers, other people that I admired and respected, hearing different viewpoints. And that was a new thing because I only heard one voice for so long. And so, what really helped me was then being vulnerable, telling everybody, here's what happened, here's what I went through. And then those people could then speak into my life. And that was awesome when I finally got that back in my life.
Mhm. That's good. That's good that people are when you can tell your story and people will be there for you. And like I think it's important too, because like when people get out of these cult dynamics or just leave the cult, to have some like if they've turned on people before, to for people not to necessarily like shun them when they get out of it, right? Because like I think especially in today's society, when you see somebody leaving a cult and that cult has done some harm, they ostracize the person that's leaving the cult. They're like, no, just stay over there. We know you did some horrible things. Like, you were in this cult. You were a bad person. You cut everybody off. We don't want anything to do with you. I don't think that necessarily helps the person that is trying to leave. They seem like
No,
might make them want to
correct.
actually go back.
Right, correct. So one of the fears is that if you do not toe the line, if you question the cult leader, and if do get kicked out, that you will be shunned. You know that, and I knew that. So I knew I would never have a relationship with Uncle Robert or Paige's parents, or maybe never with Paige. I don't know. But yes, as someone that sees the person in the cult, and let's say they said some horrible things to you, yeah, you got to be patient, you got to be loving, and you have to know where they're coming from. Like with my kids, several of my children said some really horrible things to me. I had one child look me in the eye and said, "You're a devil with no soul." I had another child to tell me that I do not need to honor you because the fifth commandment doesn't apply to you. Another child tell me that, you are a devil, you're a sperm donor in a bloodline, and I hate you. I don't want to be anything like you. And as a parent, those hurt so much. I mean, it's like a knife in the heart and it twists. But I'm not angry at those kids. And even in that moment, Lee, I wasn't angry because I knew it wasn't them. It's like a computer virus from Uncle Robert went into Paige and into the kids. And kids are impressionable. So the computer virus went in and it came out on me. And they
Mm.
don't say those things anymore, right? But there but for the grace of God go I, because the only reason I have patience and forgiveness is because the Lord has given it to me.
That's good. I feel like patience is a necessity when you're
Yeah.
trying to, reintegrate people out of the cult. Like when they finally do leave or they try to get out of there, that patience is definitely needed. And probably a place of forgiveness as well. 'Cause like you just say it, like even though your kids say that it could say some horrible things to you, it's just like it hurts to hear. I know it hurt to hear that type of thing. When I heard you say it, I was like, I can imagine like, oh, that would destroy me, even though you know where it's coming from. It's kind of like his
Right.
voice coming through
Right.
them. It's like the trickle down effect right there.
Yeah, and when I left too, real quick. So when I kind of got out of the cult, and my family kind of helped me out and really showered me with love and affection and attention. Yeah, I'm sure there were plenty of times for those first few months where they were shaking their head like, "Oh, good Lord, Peter, like when are you going to get it? When are you going to wake up and see it?" And they had to be
Hmm.
very, very patient with me, and they were.
Mm. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm glad it worked out for you. You were able to share your message and help so many people when they do decide to leave, or maybe even if they are still in it and they just come across your material or see some interviews and whatnot as well. Um, and I know we mentioned earlier like that not all cults like are out there just huge cults. Like some of them are very small, like the one you just said, the one you were in. Like so, how do those small cults like form inside of families or marriages or like communities of faith without people just even noticing it, right? Because like you said, people didn't know you were in it and whatnot. You were out here on TV and stuff.
It's a great question, Lee, and I'll be honest, I don't know how they start. Like, I don't know
Hmm.
what made Uncle Robert turn into this horrible person. I don't know what drove him to establish this relationship where he was above us and he was manipulating all of us and brainwashing us. I don't know what started it. What I can answer and tell you is that it's able to continue, it's able to thrive because of the isolation, the secrecy, and paranoia. So, like, you will never have, let's say, like a little tiny cult, like, let's say, our little group under Uncle Robert. He would have never survived if we were all going to the same church, right? Or we were, going to the Baptist church, the Presbyterian church, whatever it was. We had to be isolated on our own. So I can tell you
Hmm.
very clearly how they survive and how they can continue. But I really don't, I'll be honest, I don't know how they start. And
Hmm.
I would love to find out because it certainly affected my life. And I always wonder, what was it inside of him? What synapse in his brain kind of misfired that led him to go down this road and
Hmm.
really be the cause of the destruction of several families and this huge ripple
Yeah.
effect. I'm talking about Uncle Robert, right? Because of all the damage that he caused.
If I were to put my narcissist hat on, right, and I was just like, how do I start a cult? I wouldn't know how to do that. I think sometimes they might start accidentally, like in these situations right here. Like they just try something out and it works, and like, oh, that worked. You believe that? And it's just like, oh, what else can I do? So you start kind of, like you said, slowly and subtly, because if you go too fast, people will realize it. Like if I was Uncle Robert, I just met you like our first meeting, I'm like, you know what, Peter, the Bible's not real. You like, whoa, wait a minute. You would just take off running, right? You wouldn't want to be around him. But I think it's like the slow, subtle stuff where they see what they can get away with. Like they have these test subjects, and like you just said, her parents were kind of ripe for the picking. you find the right person, the right personality type to fall into it and listening and slowly convert that person. I don't think that's the goal. Like, how do I start this organization to take over? Right. I don't think that's the mentality. It could be that's psychopathic, right? If you go to that deep. But I think just from my perspective, if I were to try to do that, it would just start with a fear, my own fear of being alone and being powerless. And then how do I keep people around? How do I convince these people like that I'm the one? And that's where my mind would go into it right there. I need to find ways to cultivate fear because I have fear too. I feel like he started his own cult out of his own fear of being powerless or being alone and wanted to keep people around him for a long period of time. That's just my mindset when I was just put my narcissist hat on. Just think about it right there.
Well, you brought up a great
Yeah.
point in what you just said, and that is that cult leaders don't start off with utter nonsense and lies and falsehood. Otherwise, nobody would believe them. Nobody would follow them.
Mhm.
They start off with the truth, and it sounds really good. Even now, I can say there's a lot I learned from Uncle Robert that I would say is right, with really good ideas about economics and faith and U.S. history, you name it. And then they take that truth and then they slowly twist it, right? But they don't just come out of the gates like a clown and spouting utter nonsense. They've got to be
Mhm.
far more subtle and patient. And the ones that are successful are very subtle and patient.
Yeah. Because like I say, if you're just too grandiose, it just doesn't work like that. Like you just said, it's just like the Bible is just a blind book. People are just like, yeah, Uncle Robert, this is my Uncle Robert. He's kind of crazy. Stay away
Yeah.
from him, right? Because that wouldn't work over time.
Yeah.
This crazy Uncle Robert over there, just like he gonna say some crazy stuff to you. Just don't listen to him. Just
Yeah.
smile and wave at him. It wouldn't work right there. So, how has sports played a role just in your entire journey right now? I know you say when you were growing up, you wanted to be Larry Bird and things like that, but how has sports played a role in like getting out of the cult and just in your overall life right now, like writing books and things like that?
Sure. So I've written two other novels as well about faith and basketball, The Blue Team, and then Wardrobe of the Wolf, working on a third one, so it'll be a trilogy. A fascinating little point, though, Lee, is that Uncle Robert wouldn't know a basketball from a watermelon. He would not know
Mm,
golf from tennis. He didn't know anything about sports. And so he hated the fact that I loved sports and I would use sports as a metaphor for life, right? Like if you've ever been on a team, sports teach you so much respect for authority and hard work and discipline, et cetera, right? And I love that about sports. Okay, so Christ talked in parables, he used agriculture. That's just because his audience knew. I love using sports to help share the gospel because it's so applicable to every aspect of our life. And Uncle Robert hated it. He hated me doing that because he didn't know anything about sports. So I still do that. I still write. I'm still a storyteller. And I almost always, my stories revolve around sports. I don't play much basketball anymore, but I still call some local high school games, and I still write. But that's me. I'll always sports will always be very important to me.
and that's a good thing right there because, like you said, sports does teach so many other things other than the actual sport, other than the actual basketball and things like that. But like, well, Uncle, is he still alive right now? Do you know if he's still alive? I know
Yeah,
you said he was in his
everybody asks
80s.
that. As far as I know, he is still alive. I have not had any communication with him since 2018. We had a parenting evaluation a year ago because again, it's still very contentious in the courts. And based on who the evaluator spoke with, I'm 99% sure that Uncle Robert's still around. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I was just curious to see if he's still out here in the world, like doing this thing or trying to get somebody else into the kind of sworn into his cult or
Don't
whatever.
know.
And that's the cult leaders don't like giving up power, even if they get elderly and whatnot as well. Even in their later years, they still try to hold on to power until the very last possible second. I don't think is there anybody else that's in the wings to take over if something were to happen to him. I'm just curious about that because like
Yeah,
sometimes like, he didn't have a male heir.
right. Yeah. And I don't, his sons, by the way, never came to our little conferences. We would have these conferences a couple times a year. We'd meet in Northern Idaho. And then basically we just sit for 2, 3 days and listen to him talk some crazy stuff. And the sons never came. So I don't even know if they believe everything he talks about. As far as I know, he still doesn't have a grandson. But to me, this kind of points out the difference between, let's say, a cult, a true cult, small or big, and dysfunctional culture. So, like, you could have a false religion or dysfunctional culture where you might have more than one leader, more than one narcissist. To me, that's not a cult because a cult leader would
Mm,
never share power, right? And so, not only would they never share power, but they probably don't even have a succession plan because no one can live up to them, even if it's a son or a daughter. Like no one will ever be able to do the things that he or she, the cult leader, did. So, when Uncle Robert passes on, what happens? I don't know. My thought is that it just kind of goes away. I don't see anybody else picking up the torch. See him ever grooming anybody to pick up the torch.
Yeah. It seemed like he just wanted to, like, say, just concentrate power within himself and just hold on to it as long as possible. And I think that that's true with most cults out here in the world. And like you just said, I don't think most real cults only have one true leader. I just don't think they share power like that, because they wouldn't be a cult. It'd be something different, right? It'd be a
It
family
doesn't
system or
fit the
something kind of
makeup.
case.
Yeah, it does. Sorry, it doesn't fit the makeup, the psychological makeup of the cult leader, of that narcissistic, who has a very grandiose sense of mission and of self. They would never allow someone else to share power. They would never see somebody else as saying, wow, yeah, he's a great leader just like me. They're incapable of that.
I don't think they will ever say that right there. It's just like, you're just like me. I like the fact that you're
Yeah,
just like me and so close to me and everybody around. I feel like they would immediately get you booted out of there, right? They will
yes,
find
it
a way
would.
to get you out of there.
Yeah.
And so, do you kind of feel like he felt that way about you coming along? Like he felt threatened by you
Oh,
to
yeah.
a certain extent?
Yeah, so, again, I've had a lot of time to think about this and mull it over, like, and put the puzzle pieces together of how my life got destroyed and my marriage got destroyed. Clearly, for Uncle Robert, his number one prized possession was Paige. She's got 2 master's degrees. She's tall, beautiful, and well spoken. And, Uncle Robert's this short, little, portly guy who's bald, who doesn't really have a real job, has no money, and no measurable success in his life, right? Well, all of a sudden, you now have Paige hanging on his every word. Paige gives Uncle Robert instant cachet. She gives
Mm.
him kind of authority and a sense of I am a success in this world, right? So here I am now. I'm kind of Johnny come lately because I come into Paige's life when she's in her mid 20s, and he's known her since she was born. And so, yeah, I think he probably did see me as a threat. And oh, by the way, the title of my book, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, comes from a fascinating dream Paige had shortly before she met me, in which Uncle Robert twisted it on its head, 180 degrees, and was able to use that dream to manipulate Paige and further cement his control over her life. It's a fascinating story, a fascinating dream that I truly believe the Lord gave her, which was to warn her of this guy in her life that was destroying her. And then in the dream, a tall man walks in, but she can't see the face of the tall man in the dream. She hadn't met me yet. And I'm 6'5", Lee, and Uncle Robert's like 5'6". He was able to twist it around and cement his control over her. And I truly believe that the Lord meant that dream to be a warning to help rescue Paige. And in
Mm.
that regard, it's kind of a tragedy.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I was going to ask how tall you were earlier when you said she was 6'1". I was just like, how tall are you?
Yeah.
Like you met her, she's 6'1". I was like, okay, I might be about the same height or whatever. So, is there anything else you want to share with the audience about leaving a cult, recognizing the signs or anything like that?
I always tell people there's 3 key points to my book and my story that I want to share. The first one I already shared, and that is that, in a successful marriage, a strong marriage, you should have Christ in the center, nobody else. Like everybody else can help from the outside, the parent, the priest, the pastor, everybody else, okay? And then number 2, don't allow yourself to become isolated. When you are isolated, you are then vulnerable. Think about an animal in the
Mm.
Serengeti, right? The deer, the antelope, the gazelle, whatever it is. If they're alone, you're in trouble. Okay. The third thing would be that, Christianity is kind of simple, really, when you break it down, that you believe you're born again, you're saved, and then you grow in your faith, right? So we call being born again. Well, anybody tries to switch the order is acting as a gatekeeper to God. And that's what Uncle Robert did. In other words, you have to know or realize or read or do certain things before you can be saved. That's unbiblical and and that's wicked. You got to run from that person. So those are the 3 main lessons that I like to impart to the audience.
Okay, well, thank you for that. 'Cause I really enjoy talking to you. I love, like I said, I'm gonna take a lot of these bits. That whole intermediary in between God, that I put that in my wallet. Anytime I use it, I will reference you. I promise you. I was just because I was like, wait, that may because I see like when people tell the story, I see it in like I have like a little mini movie in my head. So I just see like the message from God and
Yeah.
them intercepting the message like a cold talker, and then it's like God didn't say that. You know what God really said? You should do this. I'm like, that's
Right.
that's wild. So
Right.
thank you for sharing
Right.
that, and thank you for joining me and speaking with me today, man. Like seriously, I
You bet.
really truly appreciate it. I you blew my mind with a lot of different things. I was super interested in the cult dynamics because I feel like they do resonate. Like I said, the family dynamics with narcissism and whatnot as well. So thank you so much for coming on, and I really truly appreciate it. And like I said, when it goes live, I'll shoot you an email and we'll connect and whatever and whatnot. And I'll put the links on there. And I'm gonna get your book. I want to read it to say the topic. I'm gonna definitely go get your book and read it. And I will let you. I will leave a glowing review for you. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Lee. It's been great. Appreciate you having me on.
No problem. Thank you. Let me hit that. This stop. Let me hit the stop.